Hey there, welcome to our podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, could you please do us a solid? If you're enjoying what you hear, give us a 5-star rating and hit that subscribe button on your platform. It really helps us reach more parents, coaches, and youth in the youth athlete development scene. All right, let's get into this week's chat.
All right, welcome back to the Inner Athlete podcast. We have reached a very special milestone of 100 episodes. So I thought that probably the best person to bring in is someone who's been here, right from the get-go of the podcast, is Mr. Dave Dobson. How are you doing?
I'm good. It is a very special milestone. I remember we had the first conversation whether we would start the podcast, and I think we're in 2 minds about it, but we decided to jump in and just do it. And here we are now, 100 episodes.
Yeah, zero regrets.
Yeah,
literally. It's probably been one of the most eye-opening things, especially with the amount of guests that we actually had on board as well. So as I was doing a bit of research for this episode specifically, and I was just listing off all the special guests from Melbourne, all the international guests that we've had on board as well. And it was just really cool to see just like the combination of like minds and ideas, come together, and also the nuances that, moving forward the industry in terms of youth athlete development as well. But I think before we go into, what was our key highlights and whatnot, is kind of like going back to the origin of why we actually came up with the idea of the podcast. I was talking to the guys, and it's like I had no outlet to really discuss a lot of these ideas or share or be able to collaborate with other individuals that were very like-minded. So I thought, why not do it in a podcast format where I can actually just have a bit more of a conversation, a lot more structured though, where most of the time when I'm sounding off, it's just like just in the moment kind of thing, and then at least have a bit more thought and preparation leading into it as well. So it has evolved over time in terms of the topics and the conversations that we've had, but really it was just more of an outlet to, number one, get it, whatever was on my head, out into the real world. And then number two was, we're getting a lot of questions that were being repeated, and I was just like, I'm kind of sick and tired of repeating the same answer 20 different times. So I was like, let's just put the content out there, and then if there is something specific, say for example, we've had a few kids unfortunately suffer concussions for various reasons throughout the year. I was like, well, who's the best person to listen to? Professor Alan Pierce. If people want to, we've been teaching a lot of people about activations. Who's the best? Who would be the best person to listen to? It would be Corel. Explaining in such a way that would be relevant to, I guess, our community that we actually look after, and then also the wider community as well that are actually interested in potentially working with us or working with experts that we've actually had on board as well, from that perspective. So, and then the other part is acknowledgement for the listeners as well. Kind of didn't realize it would actually go somewhat international, even though it was maybe 2% of our listeners from overseas, were in Europe or the US or along those lines. Yes, we did have a few US guests that kind of spruiked that specifically, but even beforehand as well, it was kind of, I was like, oh, I feel like I'm actually doing something if it's getting this reach. Yes, we're not like Joe Rogan and had zero intentions of even getting one nth of 1% close to Joe. It was more about, how can we best service the community and actually put, I guess, the industry in a better place moving forward. And then from there, kind of spiraled in terms of the ideas and the concepts and the individuals that we had as well. It was kind of the discussions that we have become a lot more nuanced, based on, the people that actually listen to it as well. And then also a lot of our members actually listen to it also. So, shout out to all the members here at Inner Athlete. And then also the team members and the interns. And some of the interns we've had in the past have actually provided a lot of input into the podcast to help provide that content. And then we've actually had with Damien on the podcast one time, talking about his experiences, being a national level athlete for middle distance running, and then, becoming a strength and conditioning coach himself, and, breaking down the barriers and the old school mentality from that perspective. But that's another episode in itself, so you can look back into the archives for that one. I guess, how have you found the whole podcast journey since for people who don't know, Dave is the one that does the clips and the editing. How have you found it?
Yeah, I think early days we took a lot of inspiration from a lot of other gyms and podcasts, like you said, Joe Rogan, where was talking about a lot of topics and podcast topics that are controversial and things like that. But we kind of came to the idea that we didn't want the podcast to be for other coaches and for other strength and conditioning coaches, but rather for the parents and for the members. It's almost like a bit of an in-house podcast, so that, like you said, I think we're speaking about off-air. Any topics that we did speak about on the floor, we could just recycle that topic, talk about it for 20 minutes, and then give it back to the parents or for the athletes to listen to. But we also use it as a talking point for interns as a way to sort of train them up. But as the person that was, producing it and chopping everything up and editing it, putting on online and all that sort of stuff, I was sort of a bit naive at the start, being like, hoping it would blow up and become viral. But it was never about being viral. It's about being popular in your own backyard and providing the value for people that you're trying to service, which is our members and the parents. So I remember a lot of our early episodes were just the coaches talking about a topic they felt passionate about, and stuff that was brought up in our meetings as well. So one of our first podcasts was with Zoe. Zoe's since moved on, but the episode is still getting downloads and views and listens, and so it's still as relevant as today as it was when we posted it 2 years ago. And it was about the power of parents' words. And you might think, it's not very sciencey, physiological science, S&C, but it's still very relevant in terms of the development of the student, the child, the athlete, and that carries on. But it's been a really interesting ride, and it's been interesting to see your perspective on what type of conversations should be had. And it's very different to just bringing a special guest on and talking about just popular topics that we would love to talk about, but it's not about that. It's about talking about what parents would want to hear and stuff that's relevant in today's society, and I guess common issues that aren't being spoken about.
Yeah, and going back to that point, it was all designed for parents, really, because I think there's a lack of information, and then parents always will have more questions, and for whatever reason they may not have the time. So the whole point is to have these episodes in a digestible format, so between 20 to 30 minutes long. You could go out for a walk and smash it out as well, and that was the whole part. The whole thinking behind it is make it digestible, also that information can actually be applied to the individual in question as well. So that was one of the big reasons. And then going off what you said before, Zoe's podcast is the power of parents' words. It's evergreen content. So I guess the thing with evergreen, if you don't know what it means, pretty simple. It's content that is relevant all the time, any day of the week. It's not clickbaity. It's not like topical in terms of, if it's in the news or the headlines, where some of our other podcasts have been for whatever reason, and they'll probably stay evergreen, unfortunately. Like, if we talk about concussions and, the episode with Woodford with ACLs and whatnot, unfortunately that is becoming more evergreen than ever before. So it's really just the prime focus of Inner Athlete is, talking to the parents that have youth athletes, obviously, they're kids. And then number two is making it digestible and that they can actually utilize this information moving forward, and they actually can actually do something about it rather than just be like a glorified taxi driver in that sense. And parents will always want to do more. That's what I've always found, especially with my mum. She always wanted to go above and beyond. And it was the same with your mum. She would have gone above and beyond, to make sure that it put you in the best position to succeed and whatever that was for you specifically. So that's basically what we try to do here is, bring more the practical side with that moving forward. But yeah, obviously with Zoe's podcast in terms of youth athlete development, that was a big podcast for us. And then the other one was, I guess, understanding in episode 35, where we looked at, I did the podcast, I think it was with my mum, looking at the behind the real story, or behind the story of, how Inner Athlete came to be as well. I think just going back to, the origins of how it came to be. I had issues growing up. I was overweight, lack of self-confidence and whatnot. And then the gym was actually a really good outlet. And then I was surrounded by really good mentors. Didn't really know it at the time, or wasn't even aware of it. I just didn't have that high level of thinking that came with it. And then just, I guess, out of nowhere, ends up becoming more like a 180, that I'm the ones doing the thing that they were doing to help me through a lot of things that I was going through. So I'm talking in circles now, but I think that's what I kind of noticed the most with that episode is how powerful it was to reflect on how important I guess Inner Athlete is to me because of what I actually had gone through, I guess, and then obviously I saw a problem in the market in that sense as well.
Yeah. A lot of our episodes have been really good in terms of finding out more about you as well. So I think a big thing we wanted to do as well is show a bit of our own personality as well through our conversations. And so the athletes and parents may know us through very short conversations, but it's also a way for other people to listen to us outside of the country, the state, who don't go to this gym as well. But also it was a really good way to bring some special guests on as well. And the special guests has been a really good way not only to push our information out to their audiences, but also to get more views from their followers, which is not an important thing, but it just means that we can cast a wider net and get more information out there. And like you said, we want to leave the industry in a better place. So at the moment, the fitness industry or the strength and conditioning industry is currently proliferated with so much not the greatest information. And we've done episodes on this where we try to really debunk fitness myths, but we really try and put not evidence-based information, but evidence that we know to be true, that can be backed up as well by our own experience. But also we have other special guests coming on talking about their own experience, and they've got their own social credibility. So it's been really good to get them on as well.
Yeah, and then one of those key guests was actually a former mentor of mine, was Craig Harper, and we did a couple of episodes with him. But episode 45, we discussed the hidden benefits of strength training for youth, physically, emotionally, mentally. I think it was really good for him to discuss that because him being a former fat kid, it kind of just reiterated that this happened. For those that don't know, Craig is 50 plus, just to give you a bit of an idea. So he's been in the fitness industry for a very long time. I think he started almost out of high school as well, doing group fitness and personal training. And he opened up the first personal training studio in Australia as well, which was kind of unheard of at the time and did really well business-wise, very successful. And he still continues to be successful in his own right as well. So it was really interesting to hear that even what he was going through was what I was going through, that you were going through, and then the problem really never left, or there was never really much of a solution. We kind of had to kind of figure it out, or have someone to actually help us through that process. But he was surrounded by good mentors growing up, myself, and even yourself as well, that allowed us to we want to continue on with that, and then obviously we want to help create mentors that mentor as well. So that was a really cool episode to be almost like a full circle moment with him, because he has become a mentor for me, and that I can start to mentor more people moving forward. The other episode I actually want to talk about was kind of like my experience over in the US. So episode 81 was with Kevin Schultz. This was a monster episode. I don't know how I just managed to get through it. It was so much detail. I could not believe how, even being there and living there and being amongst it, and then being a couple of years removed, there had been so much change within the collegiate setting when it comes to Division 1 sports, or even, I guess, collegiate sports. And he was discussing some simple ideas of the thing that he actually saw, and he's been in the industry for, I think, about 15 years now, at least. And he was also a coach, football coach at a Division 3 school. And he was actually saying that a lot of the times is when it comes to youth athletes is they, what's the word? They do too much of the sport. So I guess the poison is how much in what you're doing. So sport is not inherently bad. How much sport you do can be potentially bad. So if you're overdoing your sport, you're overdoing specific movement patterns all the time. So you're overloading a specific area, underloading other areas. Eventually, potentially acute and chronic issues moving forward. What he was saying is strength training and just general movement patterns and loading those up over time is going to be the antidote moving forward. And he's actually seen that with his volleyball program, And he's been with almost like 6 or 7 years now. It had major success, NCAA champions. A few of them have made the US Olympic team as well. So it's been really good to hear from that perspective that, yes, you can specialize in a sport, but the caveat is you need to be doing some sort of physical development alongside it to prevent yourself falling into this hole that's going to be very hard to dig out of with acute and chronic issues that can actually flare up because of it. So I thought that was really interesting. But making sure the culture side as well, he spoke about the culture when it comes to volleyball. It's just like getting 8 hours of sleep. Oh, that's volleyball. Eating after your training session. That's volleyball. Getting a little stretch in before you go to bed. That's volleyball. He just kind of like ingrained a really like positive culture from that perspective, and it's kind of refreshing to see that. Yes, I know they got millions of dollars and multi-million-dollar facility that they train out of and whatnot, but that wasn't the point. You could still do those things without having access to millions of dollars worth of equipment, and then also you don't need the best coaches in that sense. You just need someone who can be a relatively good culture driver, and then have someone to help actually deliver the X's and O's and what needs to be done. So I thought that was really interesting, and then I know. We talk about this quite often, and Dave, you could probably add to this as well with Alan Pearce in terms of the concussion side in sport, how big it's actually become. And I remember when we first interviewed, Alan, I think it was like a year prior, and then I decided to bring him on a year on because there was so much that had happened between that window. And then, Alan's quite funny. He just kind of takes the mickey out of the news and whatnot. And I think I'm not too sure what your belief, your awareness is. I've become a lot more aware of when, commentators, talk about a head knock. A head knock is just not. It kind of downplays what the actual injury is and then potential long-term effects of it as well. So I'm not too sure what your take is on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Before the podcast, I kind of didn't really have an awareness or that much education around, I guess, the real dangers or the real consequences of concussions. And so having pretty much an industry leader with Alan come on was massive for us, for not only to push the information that we wanted to push out to the right audience, which is parents of youth athletes who also probably aren't very educated, but myself and yourself coming from a rugby league background, we watched multiple people put shots on, and we've received shots from when we played as well. But also, when I was working with the Storm, we had a few players get concussed, and I think parents and coaches could kind of just brush under the carpet and go, "Oh, this is just a head knock." Whereas me being one of the performance staff would be like, "No, this is actually a really serious thing." And there was a scenario where one of our players got concussed, and he had to fly to New Zealand the next day.
Oh, geez.
And I was like, I would really consider going to talk to your doctor before you go on this flight, because obviously your pressure change and you're sitting down for a long period of time and that sort of stuff. And I'm a bit like, go talk to your doctor first, like the team doctor, before you get cleared. And so he went and got cleared. But if I hadn't had that information from Alan, I probably would have just treated it like, oh, it's just head knock. So yeah, it was a really eye-opening episode. And I think the landscape is really changing at the moment, especially over the last 10 years. And, movies like, the movie's called Concussion.
Yeah, it was the Will Smith one.
That was really eye-opening, but again, it's kind of another world away because it's in America, whereas, AFL, NRL, and I'm sure there's other sports out there, even soccer, even that we heard that headbutting the ball can cause very minor levels of concussion.
It's not so much concussions, but it's actually the repeated knocks. So if you're doing 300 to 500 headers a week or something like that, it's actually the repeated nature of it, and that's what they're looking in with AFL and the NFL, and that's why a lot of offensive linemen actually have, I guess, what they got Alzheimer's symptoms when they're in their 40s as well. Who's the Wally Lewis? He's almost like the they did. They had a famous painting. Someone did a painting of him with the crown, because his nickname was King Wally. Played played for the Maroons, played for Brisbane Broncos. Had a illustrious career I think it was in the 70s and 80s. And long story short, there's a picture of him, and it's him holding his brain in the photo, and it was to represent. Unfortunately, he actually suffered a stroke. It was to represent, that the brain is precious, and that it needs to be cherished and looked after. Like 2 sets of hands, so you got to be very careful with it. And then, unfortunately, because he was a TV host or news anchor, and unfortunately, he had a medical episode on air, and he was one that kept suppressing it and suppressing and suppressing it. And he's in these golden years, he should be, living life. But I think because of his rugby career, his rugby league career, potentially could have, and all the, I guess, the head trauma in that sense, could have potentially exacerbated a lot of these issues. And, the stories are kind of around. They're not really out there because it's not sensationalized as it is. But I think what happens is it gets downplayed a lot more. So if you hear someone say head knock, it's not a head knock, it's a head injury.
Yeah, show them our podcast about concussions.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's episode 79 and 80.
Yeah.
If you want to
just search up
flag
Dr. Alan Pearson, will come up.
Professor Alan Pearce, actually.
Professor.
Yeah, he'll get mad with that one.
Sorry.
And then the other part is in-season training. So one of the things I've noticed is everyone tends to have a relatively good off and pre-season. Yeah. They put a lot of time, energy, and effort. But when it gets to in-season, the first half of the in-season tends to be pretty good. And the second half of the season, injuries pop up, unfortunately. A lot of soft tissue overuse issues tend to pop up. So what we wanted to do is actually discuss areas around that. So, episode 33, we discussed, in-season training for youth. And I guess the importance of actually maintaining those qualities. Are you going to get any faster? No, it's not. That's not the idea. The idea is to maintain those qualities and microdose it throughout the training week, keeping fatigue relatively low because you're going to accumulate a lot of fatigue depending on what your sport is, obviously, in your actual games itself. So if it's basketball, soccer, field hockey, footy, rugby, those are the key sports where fatigue is going to be relatively high on the weekends, which is for obvious reasons, but you just want to microdose, strength, power, and speed throughout the in-season. I think that kind of makes it really simple. But how do you actually go about it? Just avoid bodybuilder trainings, and that would be number one. That can be used to some degree if you're just trying to get some blood flow. You can also use a bit of a recovery modality, but you're not trying to push hard and overexert yourself because you've got a game to coming up, and that should be the primary focus. And then on the activation side, so you've actually done the course with Carell and Doug. How did you find the whole activations, listening to Carell discussing, the potential mechanisms of injury as well?
I guess coming from a medical lens and understanding pain science and how the brain works with pain and trauma and that kind of thing, I kind of didn't really fully understand it, but Trent always raved on about how good the activator was, and I was like, I'll just remain open-minded about it, and I'll go in and I'll learn it. And I guess the proof is in the pudding that if they're getting results, it must work somehow. But coming from a medical lens, I was still on the sort of skeptical side, but it's been really good to sort of understand, okay, you've got, in the same sort of lens, you've got your Eastern and Western medicine, and maybe one or the other don't necessarily agree with each other, but this is just an alternative medicine that is coming through the ranks, and it works for some people. It works for what I've seen, it works for most people. But it's been interesting to see a different way to treat people with pain that haven't been able to help with before. So you've helped multiple people who haven't been helped by other people, and you've helped them solve their issues. Yeah,
it was good getting Carell's perspective because he's the one that's been teaching it for about 15 years, I think, or at least doing it for 15 years. He's been teaching it, and he's actually teaching it later on this year in the end of November. So if you're interested, details at be123.co. There you go. There's a little plug for you, Carell. The big thing when it comes to the activations, is it's understanding people's movement patterns. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. Why are they compensating? Why are they getting the same reoccurring injury? Why am I getting tennis elbow? Why am I, getting tendonitis? Why these things keep flaring up? It's like there tends to be a generalized overload, and then that generalized overload is dictated by the movement pattern itself. And then with activation, be activated is we can actually determine what that pattern may be. I'll give you an example, really simple. Got one of our athletes at the moment. It's a soccer player. Unfortunately, he suffered a meniscus tear. It was early this year. I think it was in April. Got surgery. And as he came back into training, so when we first started working with him, got him on the table and I tested him. And he tested what's called a 2-2-3. And unfortunately, with a 2-2-3, these movement patterns are for individuals that utilize their quads to drive hip flexion. Their tibialis does its own job, but there's nothing there on the anterior side to help stabilize the knee specifically under a high level of stress or duress. So if you imagine fatigue kicks in, and then fatigue kicks in, the knee is essentially is going to go to some degree. So long story short, we found out that it's bilateral on that, and then as we've gone through the activations, he's actually starting to feel a lot better and move better as well. And then if you look at someone like, and I think this is kind of prolific with a lot of soccer players, is ACL tends to be the overarching general trend. Like Neymar is also coming back from an ACL tear. We can actually question his rehab from exercises and execution of those exercises. I think that's another podcast for another day, but there's plenty of people slamming on social media. But the main thing is when it comes to a lot of these chronic issues these acute issues for him, but it happened over a long period of time in order to get to this point, was he had this pattern that was already there in place. And that can be due to a multitude of reasons as well. So that can be due to, how he practices the skill, the playing surface, his body has to adapt to a specific playing surface as well, the type of, potentially the type of shoes and the cleats. And I've noticed with a lot of soccer players as well, they've got heavy feet. Like they look like they've got concrete feet. Like they're just heavy planted. And when they turn, they don't really turn, like they don't take small steps to help them turn. It's very hard and twist. They're twisting hard into the ground. And unfortunately, over many years, he's only 15, 16 years old. That's going to create a lot of torsional force at the knee. And then as a result, the body's going to try and compensate for that, but also be able to express movement in a very powerful manner. But over time, he's developed this pattern, his compensatory pattern, and then it won't even be anything too crazy in terms of how much force is being generated, and then it'll just be the straw that breaks the camel's back in that case. And unfortunately, that was the case, and obviously we still tested him. He's still like that, but he's got work to do in terms of the activation stuff in order to help him to move in a what we'd call a 1-2-3 pattern. So that's just a bit of a snapshot in terms of what the activation stuff is all about. I've been doing it for 7 years now. I back it 100%, but I still question whether or not it's going to help someone as well. So in that perspective, I still say, let's see how it goes. I don't give them like, hey, I'm the silver bullet, the snake oil salesman or anything like that. I just say, see how it goes, and we'll see how you respond to it. Pretty simple.
Yeah, pretty much what I say too.
Yeah. And then what's the future for the podcast? So, I think the main thing is, I've actually got a few guests teed up already for, I guess the next 100 episodes in that case. I won't spoil them or anything like that, but we're going to look into other sports as well. So obviously we looked in the most popular sports like footy, basketball, soccer, or volleyball to some degree over in the US, but we're going to be dabbling into other sports like golf and fingers crossed lacrosse as well, because lacrosse is going to be such a bigger sport. And then we'll probably dabble more into the swimming side just because of our close partnership with Melbourne Swimming.
Yeah, we've done a lot of podcasts on your main Australian sports like your basketball, your soccer, your AFL, your rugby, that sort of stuff. But we have really noticed a lot of our athletes here, or newer athletes, play more of the individual sports. Like we've done some episodes on tennis. We've got a couple of golfers, a couple of swimmers. We have had a couple of dancers and cheerleaders. So they still also deserve quality education and quality information out there the same way that we can provide and give advice and education around the more popular sports, but they also need physical preparation. And that's something that Coach Whipper talked about in the last couple of episodes. He talked about like the importance of physical preparation year round. And dancing is hard, cheerleading is hard, golf is hard.
Yeah, shout out to little Indy.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see how our episodes or future episodes will start to delve into those topics that we wouldn't normally talk about because they're not very popular.
They're not popular, but I think because they're not popular, there's not much information about it. I think it just kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah, so interested to see where it goes.
And then the other part is we got the ramp up to 2032 games. So
LA.
I know. Oh no, that's
28.
28.
So what's the one after that?
32 in Brisbane.
In Brisbane, that's right.
Yeah. So what I'm seeing now, there seems to be a bit more hub and hive, drumming up now in the preparation for those games. I know I'm on job websites, not that I need another job, but it's more so to see where the industry is actually trending. I like to kind of see where things are moving forward from my own personal understanding for the industry, but also to get a bit of a gauge of where things are moving forward as well. So what are the guys, I guess, organisations at the top? What's the AIS doing? QAS, NSWIS, SASI, all of these, government organisations. What are they actually doing and who they're actually hiring? I know there's a lot of coaches. There's a lot more coaches being hired at the moment as well across the industry. Look, I think it's great. I think we're very, very much a sporting nation. And I think we'll continue to be a sporting nation moving forward. There's so much sport to cover. Sometimes I'm just like, no more sport. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm pretty happy with that. Actually, karting. I totally forgot karting. That's another sport they've actually gotten into as well. Thanks to Cooper and Craig. It's definitely a sport that I'm gonna look a little bit deeper into as well, just because there seems to be a lack of understanding preparation from that side.
Not just driving a car, a little motorised vehicle around the track.
Oh man, they're sending it. There's a track near us. It's probably like a 7-minute drive from us, and Cooper's telling me he's they're sending it like 110 to 120 depending on the wind direction. On the main straight, and I'm just like, geez. And then they're doing like 70 k's down like this little like switchback, downhill switchback, and I'm like, oh geez, that'll be gnarly. But and then he's also telling me about all the crashes. They're more often than not, and then because a lot of these kids are, I guess when you're younger, you're a lot more fearless, you're more likely to send it and make more mistakes now than later on in your career. So that's what we're hearing more of. Every second race day there seems to be a crash. When the wet weather tires come out, there's another crash as well. And it's sometimes with a sport like that is how resilient is your body to get back on the track as well. How strong do you actually feel? If you come off feeling a bit shaken and stirred, and I'm like, well, what's the likelihood of you being able to get back on that track later that day as well? So it can be a bit of a test of character in that sport. But moving forward, the 2032 games are shaping up to be a relatively big one, I reckon, the way things are tracking at the moment in terms of what the industry is doing. Hopefully, the Queensland government can, get it all together in time for that as well. And it'll be really cool to go up and, see a few athletes compete on the main stage there. But, I want to kind of close it out with this episode. To me, this is a very special milestone. This is over 2.5 years of, discussions and whinging and moaning to some degree. And, it hasn't always gone to plan. We've had technical issues and it hasn't been perfect. Our little setup here is literally just in the office as well. So it's a all-in-one purpose. That's my mentality with a lot of things. Dave's been a phenomenal a producer, co-host as well, and then we also had a lot of other guests as well. We've had a lot of parents come on, with Dolly, discussing, working with kids with ADHD and autism. We've had a lot of parents come on as well, discussing about their kids' athlete development, but not just the athlete development, but also seeing their change in how they operate as a human being, which I think is really powerful. We've had a lot of athletes come on, a lot of health professionals. I've had, former colleagues I've worked with as well to come on the podcast, which has been really cool to see. Experts within the industry like Tim Schleiger, Nathan Parnham, Ian Pope, within respectable industries, obviously Craig Harper, and then also people that we're currently working with like Ray Breed, he's from Swinburne, and then also Dean Jones with the AFL off-season program that we're working with as well. So yeah, I think the main thing is we're really excited in terms of we reached this milestone, but then moving forward, we're kind of even more excited in terms of what we can bring to the table into the next 100 episodes, which will anything else you want to sign off with?
No, thank you to all the guests that have played a part in our little episode, our little podcast. When we invite you onto our podcast, we don't take it lightly. We really appreciate your contribution, and I know there's someone out there who's definitely going to take something away from your information, and some of the stuff that we don't know, you guys are telling for us, saying to our audience. So we really appreciate your contribution to our little podcast.
Yeah, and this is just a passion project, really. No money's made off this, and we love doing it. We learn so much each time, and I love doing the research into each of the guests that come in as well, in terms of what their background experience is, and actually discussing and going deeper on how does it apply for all the parents and youth athletes and sports coaches that work within the space as well. So until the next one, see ya.
You have just listened to the Inner Athlete podcast. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the release of weekly episodes. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to get great tips on all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.